Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this very interesting event. So the topic I have chosen is science communication as the social conversation around science. With my colleague Brian Trench, during the past few years, we have started to think about a different way of thinking about science communication, and this would be the main topic of my talk. I would like to share with you some ideas on this and maybe get your feedback. I will also briefly address the topic you have here, the topic of the role of AI. I hope I can, okay. In science communication, and I will start from visible scientist, famous scientist, Nobel Prize, who wrote recently on The Guardian this comment, this opinion: is it TikTok or global crisis? How the world lost its trust in scientists like me. Giorgio Parisi received the Nobel Prize for Physics 2 years ago. There is just one problem with this piece that you can read on the Guardian. The assumption is completely wrong. It's an example of misinformation by a famous scientist, by a Nobel laureate. It's actually the opposite is true. Citizens, particularly in Europe, but not only, as we know from the Eurobarometer, from different studies, have a lot of trust in science, and actually this has increased in the past few years. So given, of course, that AI is the topic of the moment and everybody is discussing about it, I tried a very simple trick. I asked ChatGPT, I am a Nobel laureate, I want to write an article about growing mistrust of science in society and lack of confidence in scientists among citizens. Again, a wrong assumption, very short input. It's interesting that the result is much better than what Professor Parisi wrote on The Guardian. It's a little bit more elaborated. Of course, the assumption is wrong, but there are interesting reflections about transparency, public perception, and how, for example, to build transparency, integrity into the image of science communication, ethical media reporting, and so on. You can try for yourself. I mean, the same exercise. This is the book, the handbook of science communication, public communication of science and technology, where Brian Trench and I elaborated this concept of the conversation. And now we start from something that most people in science communication know very well. This is sometimes is called the deficit model. I prefer to call it the diffusionist view. The deficit model is one aspect of this model, and this was the standard view of science communication, and is still shared by some scientists, for example, as you just showed with Professor Parisi. But it was basically the standard view when I started to study science communication in the mid-90s, the idea that you have science producing results and ideas on one side, and some of these ideas through the media, but the media are not very good at doing this because they have other priorities, commercial priorities, spectacularization, different biases, and a little bit of these, maybe in a distorted fashion, trickles down to the general public. So that is the essence of the diffusionist view. The deficit model is a specific aspect, and it takes for granted, again, something never proven, actually the opposite is true, that the gap of knowledge in the general public produces negative attitudes to science. Again, a very problematic assumption. So many years ago, some colleagues and myself, we challenged this model, and we came up with a different idea of science communication as a continuum. So no sharp separation between specialist science communication and popularization or popular science, but a continuity, a continuous flow of science communication from the very specialistic, intraspecialistic stage, for example, within a specific narrow field, to the interspecialistic stage where different fields get in touch and the experts from different fields exchange ideas and results, down to the pedagogical stage, which is, of course, the science that we learn in university, for example, that we find condensed in textbooks. This was very important for Thomas Kuhn, for example, when he presented his theory of paradigm. That is where you find the paradigm, the state of the art of a certain field at a certain moment. And then the popular stage, general media, today social media, science in television, radio, news, daily news, and so on. And of course, it is shaped like a funnel because not everything, or actually very little of what the specialists discuss among them, filters or trickles down to the popular stage. So this was already a progress, a better way for us to understand science communication and its implication. You see, it's a two-way process. There is continuous flow back and forth from the intraspecialistic stage to the popular stage. But of course, nowadays we live in a different landscape that we could schematize as a science communication 1.0 versus 2.0. Traditionally, science communication was mediated and filtered by professional mediators, journalists, communicators, sometimes scientists themselves, science museums. And it was, as you have seen in the picture before, it was a vertical and sequential process, which means that first you have the discussion among the specialists, and then you have the popular communication. Today, of course, this has not completely disappeared, but we live in a landscape of, so to say, direct-to-consumer communication. The university, the research organization, through social media, they can go directly to the general public. They can offer videos, pictures, interviews with the scientists, games for children. So the key actors are not the mediators anymore, but are the research institution, the scientists, and of course the digital media corporations who are making money out of this process. It's very important to notice that the relation between the specialist and public communication level is not vertical and sequential anymore, but it's horizontal, simultaneous, overlapping. A scientist can discuss or tweet about her research, his research on social media during a conference, for example, or in connection with the publication of a paper. So you could imagine, let's see if I can go back. You can imagine this scheme as flattening, being smashed, and losing, actually, the sequence that we were used to know. And of course there is, and this is, in my view, it's the real challenge. Of course, accuracy of information, misinformation is an important aspect, but it's a broader challenge, which is the quality of science communication. In the past, we used to solve this problem through the editorial brand and the channel reputation. If it's on the BBC, if it's in a science museum, it must be something interesting and credible. But now, maybe you have an answer, I have a question mark. How do we solve the problem of the quality of science communication from the point of view of the users of science communication? So, as I said, we tried to make more general sense of science communication today, and we propose this idea of the science communication as the social conversation around science. Science communication is society talking about science, and of course the society includes the scientist in different ways. Conversation, a few of you were with us at the workshop symposium in science communication in Venice, and they had the fortune of seeing one of these examples of the so-called sacred conversation. This is a format of painting that became very common, not just in Italy, but mainly in Italy in the 16th century. It's called the conversation. It's normally, there is the Virgin Mary with saints and musicians and Jesus as a baby, and it's portrayed as a sort of a silent conversation where the Virgin Mary acts as a mediator between the divine and the human dimension. This format then lost its religious characterization particularly during the 17th and 18th century, and the conversation became a format for representing bourgeois or normal people, again, conversating, engaging with each other, enjoying the pleasure of talking about different things. Let me emphasize one characteristic of conversation. It's that it is unpredictable and open-ended. So ideas, information, or images from and about science can spread widely as one conversation opens another. So in the process, the ideas, information acquire new meanings. The process does not always or only depart from science. Remember what I showed in the beginning. But the process goes around in society independently and with interruptions. And this is the idea why we say social conversation around science, the idea that ideas from science and about science move around and, for example, inspire also works of art or literature or music. Many meanings of conversation can be accommodated in the discussion, the structured engagement across society, the sponsored consultation, the spontaneous cafe chat, the strongly centered national conversation with the desire to shift public opinion in a certain direction, and the internet mediated between experts and publics as expressed in this online magazine, which is called The Conversation, a UK magazine where scientists write for the general public. And of course, conversation also includes protest or mobilization by citizens about science-related issues. The first picture is from one of the marches for science. The other two pictures are the protest of amateur scientists against the declassification of Pluto as a planet. So they are saying size doesn't matter. Let me say a few things about the implications of this idea of science communication as a social conversation. It gives higher priority to question of ethics, equity, inclusion, quality, and history in the analysis of science communication. It suggests that evaluation of practice might be done in terms of how and how much a given practice or a set of practices stimulate wider conversation. Often we have used in the recent past, for example, in European policy, a narrow definition of science communication and a narrow definition of quality impact, effectiveness, expectation, or quick fixes and solutions. If we view science communication as a social conversation, we expand and deepen also the quality challenge, increasing the range of relevant points of view and stakeholders. The quality of a conversation, this is very important, can never be judged just by one of the parties of that conversation. The quality has to be judged by all those who are involved in the conversation. It also points to a bigger context for analysis and reflection on science communication. on the role of science communication, the responsibility of science communication. I think we have seen a lot of this during the pandemic. On the one hand, an unprecedented, maybe the biggest experiment in the history of humankind about science communication, an unprecedented level of exposure of scientific experts on television, news, social media, but many of them were not prepared to deal with such responsibility. They were relying, as Professor Parisi, on stereotypes of the audiences of science communication. So the long-standing issues of impact and effectiveness of science communication are put by the conversation idea into a new context in which questions are raised about the values and social purposes guiding science communication and about the largely tacit political and economic connotations of keywords like responsible innovation. So if we use social conversation around science as a general framework, we can easily adjust and comprehend a number of ways and a number of configuration of science communication and the interaction of scientific experts with general audiences. And we can represent this on a general scheme that goes from dissemination. Remember the good old deficit model. Dissemination is sometimes also called popularization, when we present finished knowledge about informing, making aware citizens of new results, new areas of inquiry. The dialogue is already a more interactive dimension, discussing the implication, for example, of science and science research. And then participation. It's about sharing, co-creating, participating in the very process of building knowledge. If you think, for example, about areas like the environment or health and the mobilization of citizens or patients or families of patients. And of course, each model, each configuration is associated to different social perspectives. Science literacy, technocracy in the case of dissemination, science in society, post-normal, post-academic science in the case of the dialogue, society in science, civic science, citizen science in the case of participation. So in this model, there is not one best way for communicating science. There is not one solution, one golden standard. There are different configurations depending, of course, on the aims, but also on the topics, on the attitudes of citizens. And of course, this can also range from the deficit, as I said, to the popularization, but also, for example, to the film and fiction use of scientific concept or the art and science collaboration. And if you look at this bar at the end, the flow is from purposive, hierarchical, formal, and closed science communication to non-purposive, participatory, informal, and open. So again, it's a continuum. It's a continuous process. And I won't go into the detail, but of course you can focus on these three main forms of interaction and again, look at their differences and varieties. So I will finish by going back to the topic of AI and science communication. Of course, this is all very new, and again, sometimes it is approached in a very narrow way. What is the impact of replacing humans, for example, in writing science story? Of course, this is just one aspect of the impact of AI. We need also to focus on public perception of AI in different fields. And these are some of the early data that we have about the public perception of artificial intelligence. That is the special Eurobarometer of a couple of years ago, where the expectations seem to be mostly this is a breakdown by countries. I think Italy and Estonia are more or less on the same line, but of course you can read the whole report. This is a very recent study we did with our barometer in Italy, and most of Italian citizens seem to think that artificial intelligence can be used but must be strictly regulated. There is a strong feeling that there is a need of regulation, that this is what we've been missing for many other digital innovation in the recent past. But also 17% who think it should be banned altogether. So of course that should also be taken into account. More than half of the Italian public opinion feel they don't have enough information, which is rather wise and reasonable at this stage. So there's a big room for communication about this topic, good quality communication. These are data from Switzerland. It's quite interesting how much citizens are willing to read news content written without AI, with the assistance of the AI and wholly by AI. And they seem to be at the moment more willing to read things written without AI, or at least in collaboration. And it's interesting, our Swiss colleagues, they distinguished here between different topics. So when it's about routine news, gossip, or sport, people bother less about stories created with artificial intelligence, but when it comes to culture, economy, science, and politics in particular, they are much more skeptical. So a few key points, but as I said, it's very early for this topic. The issue of transparency, which content is generated or assisted through AI, what is the quality? That remains the question also for human-generated science communication. Of course, the misinformation is one aspect, but not the only one of this quality. And of course, as we saw with the pandemic, again, researchers and their institutions should be prepared to deal with this, with the impact of this innovation. So to finish, back to my point, will the conversation around science and science communication be including also machines? I don't know, of course, but it's a possibility that we should take into account. Thank you.
Thank you. Kas meil on mõningaid küsimusi esinejale? Jaa. Toivo Maimets, väga meeldiv.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much for your nice presentation. I really love your optimism, and also optimism of Anu Noorma as well, about the public perception of science, that there is high support among public towards science, and it is ever increasing. However, I think the Eurobarometer things what you show do not still cover the COVID period. The Eurobarometer you showed for 2021, it still doesn't cover that. But we have a very recent survey from the United States American Institute of Life. And this is a huge survey. It came out on the 28th of September. And this basically shows that the public trust towards science in the United States has fallen over the last 4 years 16%. 16%, down to 69%. And of course, there's a huge gap between supporters of Republicans and supporters of Democrats, and of course, religious people and others. But this shows a huge fall. In Estonia, our recent data come from 2020, and the support is 79%. of science, and now there's a new one going on, just to be started, and I'm very much afraid that this number will be much lower. So how would you comment that? Do you think the United States and Europe are different, or where do you find the discrepancy?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, I didn't show the most recent data because, of course, my topic today was not trust in science. We have data in Italy, for example, from 2023, and we were able for the first time to distinguish different meanings of trust in science, because, of course, trust in science, it's a very general topic. And what we found is very high and increased during the pandemic. Same thing, for example, in Sweden, Vetenskap och allmänhet, Germany, Wissenschaft im Dialog, 85% people who trust in science. Trust in scientists, very high. Trust in scientific institutions, also very high. The problem comes when we ask about a scientist who discuss publicly in the media or social media, and there it falls down to 50%. And this was very clear during the pandemic that, for example, the polyphony of voices of discussion among the experts created confusions in citizens. We know this from Italy, Germany, and other countries. Now, about United States, as you were saying, of course, that's a different situation from Europe. It's a different also political context. The Pew Foundation actually found high and increasing level of trust until 2021. The Pew Foundation is the most established source of data about public opinion in United States. I'm afraid I don't know this new survey. I will have a look. It depends, of course, how the questions are asked. But as I said, in Europe, the trend has been very clear for the last 10 years at least, and in most countries it has actually increased during the pandemic. Then, of course, as I said, what does it mean to trust science? What are the different dimensions? I think we should better understand and investigate this. And of course, as the people here who work in the communication of university know, there is an increasing tension between the individual communication by individual scientists and the institutional communication. And of course, that's a very sensitive issue also in terms of public perception. Is this scientist speaking under his personal or a personal view, or is speaking on behalf of an institution, organization? Is he representing the views of the field, or is just a personal view? That of course, it's a sensitive issue.
Thank you. Kas meil on veel küsimusi? Jaa, väga meeldiv, aitäh.
Thank you for the talk. I have a question about whether you think the conversation within science is also going to change, because right now there are many apps that use AI to help PhD students who are struggling for time and money to sort of, skip a few things that we used to do back in the day, but perhaps the up-and-coming researchers don't have to. For example, with reading research papers written by other scientists. Now there are apps that make abstracts of those, and then somebody would, a robot would read them to you, so you can go through 100 articles per week without reading anything. Do you think this, skipping these steps and sort of living in a world of abstracts, will that change the conversation not just between scientists and society, but within scientists themselves?
I think potentially there is a possible change also in the way the presentation of scientific results is organized. But for example, my colleague Frank Pasquale in America, who is much more expert than me about artificial intelligence, his view is that the potential is there if we use it as a collaboration, as an integration of human activity. Of course, if we use it as a substitute, a number a number of problems may arise. And in any case, as for any other innovation, I mean, if you think about the car, as a technology, it took almost a century to regulate properly and to build an infrastructure, for example, of norms and safety and responsibility. So I think we are faced with similar questions about technology. For example, the question of copyright. Who owns the copyright of certain outputs of artificial intelligence? And also, I think we should be more careful about the context of technology, because if ChatGPT, for example, would be controlled by a Chinese company rather than an American company, would we be more worried about the use and the output and the potential distortions, for example, of information? I don't have an answer, but these are questions that we should raise at the level of, I suppose, international regulation. But the answer is yes, it has a potential to change the technology in history has changed the way scientists communicate. For example, if you think about the creation of journals, which didn't exist at the beginning of modern science, that's a very powerful technology.
Thank you. Kas soovib keegi veel midagi küsida? Jaa. Nii, Katrin, palun. Aitäh.
Hello, thank you. It was very interesting, but if you are talking that now discussion goes directly public, isn't there a threat that it doesn't give for scientists to think all these kinks and some conflicts and so on, and then we go to Twitter or X or whatever it's called and everywhere else, and we start this discussion and public is confused because we say one thing and 2 weeks later something else, and so this trust will erode? Or what do you think about this going too fast to public?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think that is one of the challenges that scientists and their organization should be prepared to deal. Because again, during the pandemic, we saw scientists who were talking like they were talking to their colleagues, but if you say the same thing that you would say at a conference or a workshop on television or social media, it may have completely different effects and interpretation. So I think this is the point about this landscape of communication. I think it's inevitable with digital media, you know, that the communication becomes more horizontal and simultaneous. We have even seen, if you remember, about 10 years ago, there was this scandal of the email among climate scientists who were revealed. So it's very difficult to keep the sequence. There have been discussions in Italy, in Switzerland, maybe in Estonia as well, about not letting scientists speak, for example, without the authorization of their research institutions. But this is against most constitution in democratic countries, because scientists have a right to speak and say whatever they want. In principle, the challenge is to support them, to be prepared, because, of course, communicating through social media can be very, very demanding, can be frustrating, for example. So I think there is a long way and a great and fascinating challenge that the scientists cannot face individually. It should be through their institution, through people who are professional about science communication. And with this, I do not mean knowing the tricks of the algorithm or how to make a beautiful video or a nice video on Instagram. I mean knowing about your audiences and knowing about the media logics and knowing about how science is changing. So this I think is one of the challenges for science communication in the next few years.
So thank you, Professor Bucchi. I have a different kind of question. So science communicator as a profession is quite new, and we expect them to be like unicorns or superhumans with variety of different skills. So they had to be like professional photographers, visualizers, good listeners, translators between science community and broader public. But in the real life, they often struggling between many of different small tasks, and often feels a bit undervalued in the organization. So I would like to ask for your advice. How can we best support our young colleagues from being burnout or overworking, and how to support their career paths?
Mm-hmm. I think, well, one important point is about the training of science communicators. For example, a few years ago, we started this new program in my university. It's an international program online that shifted the focus from science journalism to communicating about science and innovation within organizations. Because, of course, the demands and the priorities are different. And I think the focus should be not so much, as I said, on the practical skills, but on the understanding science, the media, and audiences. Of course, what you say is very important, the recognition within organization. That's an issue both for professionals and both for scientists who are voluntarily engaging in science communication. That, of course, it's a major discussion in many countries. I think it's a responsibility for funding organization or for ministry organization to evaluate and to reward these activities, as you are doing, for example, with this prize. This is one of the ways for people who contribute to science communication to emerge. But again, you might say, oops, I am too optimistic, but I have seen a substantial change in the past few years, that science communication is becoming more and more important and more recognized as an integral part of the work of science and the process of science. And this is, then of course, the next step is doing not more, but better science communication. And then, of course, what does it mean? There are different dimensions of quality. Accuracy is one dimension, but there are different. For example, intelligence of audiences is another dimension. Clarity of aims is another one. Sometimes universities or organizations, they want to do too many things together. They want to attract new students, raise the profile, branding, marketing. These are different things, of course, and the public would perceive them as different priorities. We should not forget that we live in an age of paradoxes, that everybody complains about the quality of information, but nobody wants to pay for the quality of information. We expect information to be free. Good information has a cost, and somebody should pay, either because there is a business model that works, which of course we know is a problem in the information industry, or because there are public television or public bodies who support this. So this, I think, are not just challenges for science organization, but for society at large and cities. Also because in the age of digital media, the users are expected to be much more active and deciding what is interesting and what is good quality. Before, of course, that was done by the channel for them. So there's a lot of work to be done for you.
Thank you. Aitäh, kõikidele küsimusi on küsinud. Kas on veel harukordne võimalus veel midagi küsida? aga ma saan aru, et kõik on saanud ammendava vastuse. Thank you so much. May I ask the last question? What was the last thing you looked up from ChatGPT, you personally, for example?
This one I showed. I don't use it very much.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.